Welcome to Ric's Corner. I got Jerry Brainum back. You people have asked for him over the past year. He's like the guru of science and bodybuilding and nutrition and chemicals and everything else. He's a walking encyclopedia. I can vouch for that myself for sure. So one of the subjects I want to touch on is Synthol, because it's really kind of like undetermined what it does and what the side effects are and how it works and what it's all about. But Jerry will know. And so I wanted to ask him for you guys to tell me what Synthol actually does, if it's safe, if it's not, and what do you expect to get out of it.
Okay.
So how does this work?
Okay, well let's first discuss what Synthol is.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's go back to a little history, how it came out.
Okay.
It was actually developed by a German bodybuilder, and the original name was Pump and Pose.
Right, I've heard of that.
Right, remember that?
Yeah.
Now, what it consists of is very simple. You've heard of medium-chain triglycerides, which some people use as a supplement. It's actually a fairly decent supplement for certain things, right?
Okay.
It's actually making a comeback now because that's one of the active ingredients in coconut oil, which is now a big thing. Suddenly it's like a real big fad item.
I take it every morning.
Yeah, it's one of the main ingredients in there is medium-chain triglycerides, right?
What does that do?
What is medium-chain triglycerides? Medium-chain triglycerides, they sometimes call it a fatless fat because it's kind of like you have like short-chain, medium-chain, and long-chain. The long-chain fatty acids are stuff like, for example, fish oil.
Okay.
You know, and some vegetable oils, that type of thing.
Okay.
The short-chain are actually, classic examples. One called butyrate. There's another one called propionate. This is actually made by intestinal bacteria. We could do a whole show on that. It's a burgeoning science now because it protects you against all kinds of diseases. But the medium chain, they're right in the middle. Now, what makes them unique is that normally fat has a rather complex digestive process. It has to have, for example, bile secretion. When you eat fat, you have to have a bile secretion. It has to go through the lymph system, blah, blah, blah. Now, medium chain triglyceride, because of its structure, bypasses all of that stuff. It goes in the liver and it goes right into energy.
Okay.
Right? And so they call it a fatless fat because it's a fat that when you take it orally, the energy that it produces comes almost as rapidly as carbohydrate.
That was my question. Is it like carbohydrate?
It's like carbohydrate in the sense of producing rapid energy, right?
Okay.
Now here's where the advantages come from using it orally. One property of medium chain triglyceride, you know what ketones are from the old, the low carbohydrate diet.
Right.
Briefly for the listeners, in case they don't know, ketones are byproducts of fat metabolism. Incomplete, when fats aren't completely broken down, these ketone bodies, which are kind of metabolic acids, are produced, and there's a big debate about them, but you have to go on like almost a very, very low carb diet. It has to be below 50 grams. But medium chain triglycerides have a very high tendency to be converted into ketones. Now, you'll say, okay, what good is that? Here's the thing. One of the properties of ketones, and this is why low carbohydrate diets are good for bodybuilding, because ketones actually have an anti-catabolic action in muscle. They can be used as an energy source instead of sugar, instead of glucose, for your brain and your muscles. In fact, your brain actually prefers ketones ahead of glucose, right? Okay. So, in other words, when you are on a low-carb diet and you're on low calorie, as you lose body fat, there's a danger of starting to dig into your muscle when you start, especially if you're not on drugs.
Right.
You're going to start losing muscle size. We've all experienced that. But if you take something like medium chain triglycerides,
which is coconut oil,
or you can get it as a separate supplement, medium chain, but it's derived from coconut oil.
Okay.
That will readily convert into ketones, and it will actually blunt the muscle loss that you would otherwise experience if you stayed on a low carbohydrate diet.
Gotcha.
Now this is only when your body fat's low. If you still have body fat, you don't have to worry about this stuff.
Yeah.
But if you continue to stay on an ultra low carb diet and you're already lean, then there's no fat left to burn. But you're going to go into the muscle. Okay. So you got to throw in something to give. It's like throwing wood into a stove. You got to give some fuel for the body. So that's where the MCTs orally come in.
Okay. Now, how does this relate to Synthol?
Okay. What Synthol is MCT oil, right? Okay. Now, what it does is it actually. It doesn't readily break down when you inject it like it does orally.
Okay.
So it kind of like fills up the muscle. And if you put in a muscle, it gives the look of artificial size. Now, what they do is it's actually painful normally to inject that. So what Pump and Pose did, and what all the average Synthol supplement, let's say, does, is they throw in a local anesthetic called lidocaine.
Sure, I know what it is.
Right, lidocaine is actually used to be part of an anabolic steroid called what's the one that remember? Okay, this is interesting. Do you remember is it not Equipoise? A cycling.
Sure.
Now think back. What was the main reason of a cycling? Do you remember?
Yeah, I used to have a bottle in the house. Used to inject it into a muscle that was lagging to irritate it, to blow it up.
Exactly. Right. And did you know that it's you know what it had in there? It had in lidocaine. Why? Because the cycling was extremely irritating. So they had to put in lidocaine. Otherwise, it would have drove you crazy.
They use lidocaine and cortisone shots when I get them in my shoulder and my knee.
Exactly.
Lidocaine just to numb it, because otherwise the cortisone would burn.
Your dentists still use it on your teeth too sometimes, right?
Right.
Now the thing is, what they do is they put the lidocaine in so you could take this this medium chain triglyceride, and the German bodybuilder whose name I unfortunately don't remember, the guy who actually came up with this pump and pose, he looked at they took a cycling off the market. And he said, "Gee, what can I do to give that temporary size increase? That's not a drug." And he researched it, and somehow he found that medium chain triglycerides would provide a similar effect. So what he did is basically duplicated a cycline, by instead of using the steroid, he used MCT with the lidocaine, just like the anabolic steroid cycline, right? And sure enough, it provided this temporary, kind of like size effect. Right. But unfortunately, as anyone can go on the internet and Google some of the photos of these guys who use these. Sure. I mean, they're freakish. I mean, they put too much in. And there's another aspect that is not often discussed, which I've written about, is that if you put too much of this stuff in your muscle, it actually breaks down the muscle. And the muscle is actually replaced by scar tissue. Okay. And it's a permanent disfiguring effect. One guy, they wrote him up as in a case study in a medical journal, he kept on injecting in his biceps. Right. And believe it or not, it gave him 26-inch arms. Yeah. 26-inch arms. They look horrible. They looked horrible. But what they did is he started to have problems. His arms were going dead, and he couldn't work out. He couldn't even do a 5-pound curl. So he goes to the doctor. They did some imaging studies, and they found that his muscle, the bicep, was gone. It was completely replaced by scar tissue and what they call fatty lipomas, which are small fatty tumors. Mm-hmm. That's what his bicep was. This big bloat that you see. I mean, he still had the giant arm, but it was no longer muscle. It was a combination of scar tissue and fatty tumors. Unbelievable. And the thing is, and sadly, it was permanent.
Now, you have to inject this like every day?
You can inject it every day or maybe once a week. It depends on what you're going for.
And how long does it last?
Oh, it lasts quite a while. I don't know offhand exactly how long, but it lasts quite a while because it's actually, it kind of stores as a, so you have to understand, anytime you put a foreign substance in your body, the body kind of forms, encapsulates it.
That's the word I was looking for.
This is what happens with women with breast implants. Yeah. In other words, it's silicone. So when they put in these silicone sacs, the body forms a kind of a capsule around it because it doesn't want the other tissues exposed to a foreign substance, right? Right. And they actually tell women to literally, squeeze their breasts, or the doctor does it, to break up the capsulation. Otherwise, it becomes hard as this table, the breast, right? Right. So this is why it lasts a long time, because when you inject the Synthol, again, you get that encapsulation, so it just sits there in the muscle. It could last, God knows, months, maybe even a year. Yeah. It all depends on how much you inject. Okay. But here's the key, though, Rick. The more you inject, the greater the chance of having that fibrotic, fatty tumor thing, where you're literally eating your muscle away.
Well, the guys that do it, they have to inject the delts, the bicep, the tricep, the forearm, everything.
Right, exactly.
In order to balance it out.
Right, right.
And sometimes it comes out flat on the bicep, or it's too big on this side, not big on that side. So there's a whole science to it.
I saw a guy that was a pro bodybuilder. I don't want to mention his name, but he was injecting his rear delts. I remember he showed up at the Olympia, and it looked like he had a big tumor. Mm-hmm. It didn't look like a real delt. It looked like everyone was looking at it.
I've seen that.
Anyway, so it can give you, like you say, a really freakish, unnatural appearance. And a favorite muscle to inject it in is the calves. Right. Because let's face it, the calves on 9 out of 10 bodybuilders are the hardest muscle. Unless you're blessed with genetic calves.
You don't have them otherwise.
You don't have them. Let's put the cards on the table, right? And the thing is, when when these guys inject it in the calves, unfortunately, it gives you like this really obvious freaky look that looks just ridiculous. I mean, again, you can go on the internet, go on Google, and just put Synthol bodybuilders.
Yeah, you'll see it. It's crazy. But what about tendons? For example, I ripped this tricep off years ago, so my tricep shot up my arm,
right,
and now I have a gap where I have a nice full tricep. It's just tendon.
Okay.
Can you put it in tendon or no?
I would not. No,
okay.
It's not going to. The tendon is a different kind of tissue than muscle.
Right.
It's much less vascular.
Right.
It's kind of like pure collagen.
It can barely, and maybe even tear it.
It would actually weaken it.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, just while we're on the subject, you've heard of myostatin, right?
Sure.
Okay, myostatin is a protein that inhibits muscle growth.
Right, I know that.
Right, and it's a bodybuilder's dream because animals, and one human on record, when you're born without the genes of myostatin, without working out, you get these massive cut-out muscles with low body fat. Now, that's the bodybuilder's, what is it called, holy grail.
Of course, they're looking for myostatin blockers.
Right, they're looking for myostatin blockers, right?
Yep.
Okay, now, there actually exists now, as we speak, there's experimental drugs that are not available to the public that do inhibit myostatin. Why are they using it? Why are they developing it? It's not for bodybuilders. It's to treat muscle diseases.
Yeah, but it'll end up in the hands.
It'll end up in hands. But in the meantime, you have a couple of supplements called myostatin blockers. The original one was made from seaweed. And what they did is one really obscure journal came out with a study where in a test tube, they exposed muscle to, and they put a little bit of muscle, and they put this myostatin blocker from seaweed in there, and sure enough, it blocked the myostatin effect. But it was in a test tube.
Right.
And when they actually tried it in human beings, in fact, in a study with bodybuilders, it didn't do anything at all. Right. Now, here's the point I'm trying to make in relation to what your question. What a lot of bodybuilders, this is very important, folks. So what a lot of people don't know is that myostatin is needed to regenerate tendons. In other words, if you block myostatin, your tendons are going to break down.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, very few people know that. So, if you're really interested in being strong and keeping your muscle size, you don't want to use a myostatin blocker, even if it was available, because what's going to happen is one of these days you're going to be doing curls or
it's going to rip.
It's going to rip. It's going to rip because the tendons will not regenerate without myostatin.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about your newsletter.
Okay.
I told you this guy's a world of information, so now we're going to get to the newsletter he writes, because this is going to be something you're going to want to watch or read and get, because he knows what he's talking about. So let's talk a little bit about
Okay, Rick, as you know, we know each other for years. I've written for bodybuilding magazines for about 35 years.
Yeah.
I have about 5,000 published articles. I was the science editor of Muscle and Fitness for 10 years when it was at its peak in the 90s.
Right.
I was the associate editor or the editor-at-large at Flex magazine for 8 years. I wrote for Iron Man for 28 years, and on and on and on. I've had, God knows how many magazines.
Yeah, I know.
I can't even keep count myself, right? But anyone who reads bodybuilding magazines knows that they've evolved, and unfortunately, it's not a positive change a lot of times. In other words, what's happening is a lot of the bodybuilding magazines have evolved in the sense that originally, they made their money from subscribers and from newsstand sales. But over the years, because everything went up, the cost of putting a magazine together, the paper costs, they've became dependent on advertisers.
Right.
Now, the major advertisers, anyone could confirm this by just going to a newsstand, the major advertisers in bodybuilding magazines are sports supplements. Now, as the internet has gained in popularity, a lot of the companies that sell various sports supplements, protein powders, whatever, they've abandoned the magazines, and now they're going to the internet.
Sure, everything's internet now.
Right. So now you say to me, well, what does this have to do with anything? Well, what happens is that the budgets of bodybuilding magazines have dropped, right? They've dropped to nothing. So what you have a situation today where the staff writers they're still getting full salaries. The freelance writers are getting the amount of money that they got paid in the 50s, which would be approximately enough to maybe put gas in your car. That's about it.
Okay.
So I'll just leave it up to your imagination, the type of people that are writing for the magazine.
Right.
A lot of the articles in the magazines aren't paid for at all.
Not anymore.
So here's the point. You're not going to get a lot of expertise because nobody with a brain, nobody who knows anything is going to work under those conditions, right? So, I looked at that, and, then I went on the web and I started looking at these blogs and these nutrition sites, and they were just all inaccurate. They were misleading, false information. There was all of what they call bro science, where guys were giving each other advice about drugs and supplements. It was completely wrong. And I said to myself, you know, I had a newsletter that was published by Iron Man in the late 90s. It lasted 2 years. It was a print publication, sent out in the mail. This is before the internet was big. It was called Applied Metabolics. I said, you know what? I think I need to bring back this newsletter because people are being misled. There's inaccurate information, and most of all, the magazines are not telling the whole story.
Yeah.
They have to hold back because if they write anything negative about supplements, if they write anything about drugs, boom, they're in trouble.
They're in trouble. They don't like that.
So I felt there was a need for this publication. So and you know, when you hear the word newsletter, I know I was like this. You think of like a 2-page piece of crap.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
I know one guy sends me a newsletter. What it consists of is where he's going to be this month.
Right.
You know, his appearances, where he's doing
Right.
something. That to me is, I don't know what that is. It's free. Well, it's useless.
Okay.
Who cares where this guy's going to be?
Tell us about yours.
My newsletter is like more like an ebook. I mean, for example, my first issue, the September issue, which is out now, is 30 pages.
It's a big newsletter.
I mean, and here's the key: there's no advertising. I don't have to. I don't have to worry about anybody. You know, I could write whatever I want. In other words, there's a whole truth about supplements. I mean, I'm telling it like it is. I have an article in there, for example. The lead article is a complete guide to natural bodybuilding nutrition. In that article, I tell everything a natural bodybuilder needs to know to get in the best shape of his life.
Okay.
Now, whether he wins or not, that depends on the judges and genetics.
That's the judge,
I can't control that. But from a nutritional standpoint, he'll know everything scientifically proved that will lead to his or her maximum condition.
Now, how do they get the newsletter?
How do they get the newsletter? I have a website called appliedmetabolics.com.
We'll put that up.
Appliedmetabolics.com. Anybody can join the newsletter, and it's a monthly publication. Some guy complained the other day. He says, well, I don't want to be tied into a year if I haven't even looked at the newsletter. Nobody's tied into a year. It's month to month. If you don't like the newsletter, you could cancel it with one click of a mouse.
And what's it cost?
It costs $10 a month.
It's nothing.
That comes out to 33 cents a day, right?
That's nothing.
Now, Rick, if you buy the LA Times, it's $1.50.
That's true.
That's $45 a month.
And you don't read the whole thing.
You're not going to read the whole thing. I know when I read the Times, I'm like, if I read 3 articles.
Let's do the cartoons and that's it.
Yeah, that's it. You know,
the obituaries at our age.
But here's my personal promise to anybody. My absolute pledge is that, and anyone who's read my articles knows this is true. Anyone who reads my newsletter, I guarantee every issue you will learn something. Every issue you will learn something. Like I just told you about the tendons and myostatin, that kind of stuff. I'm gonna write stuff that you don't see anywhere else. It's not going to be on any website. It's not going to be in any. Forget the magazines. I mean, but don't get me wrong. I don't want to condemn magazines. I mean, they gave me a good living for a number of years. Well, a bare living for a number of years, right? They have their use. And here's what their use is. For those who want to see pictures of the top bodybuilders, photos, if you want to read 100 articles a year on how Phil Heath trains his arms, buy the magazines, by all means.
I see that
by
all the time.
all means, buy your magazines.
Yeah.
Because you know what? I'm not going to be covering that stuff.
Right.
My stuff is going to be for thinking people that want to know the truth about nutrition, training. I'm going to cover longevity research for older guys. You know, I'm going to discuss ways to keep what you have. In other words, to keep your body without degenerating, without losing all your muscle, losing your brain. I'm gonna talk about all the ways to do that. I'm gonna talk about ways to prevent heart disease, cancer. This is in addition to exercise science and nutrition science and supplementation.
Okay.
So all of that's going to be covered. Women's health, everything. I'm going to cover all that stuff. In other words, there's going to be something in there for everybody. That's what I say.
And they can find it where?
Applied Metabolics, one word, appliedmetabolics.com.
Okay, that's going to be on here. I'll put the link up. You can click on it, and you can look up Jerry, and you can see he knows what he's talking about.
And if anyone has any questions they want to ask me about the newsletter, they can, feel free to join my Facebook page, Jerry Brainum, Jerry Brainum on Facebook. If they want to send me a message, feel free.
Okay, I don't want to give away too much because this is too interesting. But thank you very much for doing this.
Sure.
And we're going to do another show, but I want you guys to get the point on Synthol, about his books, about what he's doing. There's just so much knowledge here. It's like it's untapped, and we got to share this. And you guys will be able to learn from Jerry. He's one of the best. He can share everything in this newsletter that you want to learn to build your body and keep it in shape. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching Rick's Corner. You guys have been great fans.
It's That's rickdrasin.com. He is the equalizer, baby. See you next time.